Ladies and gentlemen, let's start. Honorable members of parliament, honorable senators, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and panelists, dear friends, welcome to you all to our high-level parliamentary meeting in Bali. This year's meeting special focus on investing in human capital. And I'm very honored to moderate this session to discuss how to create jobs for young people in fast-changing world. This morning, we learned with the Speaker of the House and the Minister of Economy that Indonesia continues to enjoy robust growth projected at 5.3% for 2018, thanks in large part to pick up in investment as well as high commodity prices. But with a young population, the median age is around 28. However, the share of job-working population is keeping growing, and we need more jobs. Indonesia is the fourth populous country in the world, undergoing demographic transition. This young and growing workforce will need quality jobs. This is why higher and sustainable inclusive growth and economic diversification need to stress on three tools: on improving education quality, easing labor regulations, and investing in infrastructure, digital development, and technology. It is the case for many countries here that currently face challenges in employing their young population. Young people's jobs may be hit hard by automation. Old jobs will go, new jobs will come. The fourth industrial revolution is transforming every human activity: the way we communicate, the way we learn, the way we work, the way we govern, and the way we do business. The latest IMF research shows that the investment in human capital is key to allow low-skilled workers reap the gains of technological change. The World Bank will be publishing its flagship World Development Report on the changing nature of work. And the Parliamentary Network is keen to present the future of the work. This was led by our colleague, Honorable Liam Byrne, which will look at technology improvement and how the relation to overall living standard and how we need to reorganize social, economical, and even emotional through investment in human capital. We will learn more with our panelists. Let's start with keynote with Honorable Liam, please.
Well, Orfa, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, it's a great honor to be here just to talk very briefly about the book that's on your table. And I want to start by really just congratulating the Parliamentary Network for taking this leadership position on jobs of the future and jobs for our young people. I serve a constituency called East Birmingham in the United Kingdom. We are the constituency with the highest youth unemployment in the country. And yet around our young people, we have all kinds of opportunities that are opening up, creating good jobs. And so I know that I can't serve the people who send me to Parliament unless we find answers to this agenda. Putting this short book together, it felt to me that what we really need as politicians is to create a kind of project hope for the future of automation. We know that technology change could add tremendous value to the global economy. So some estimates are that $16 trillion could be added to global GDP by 2030. Yet we also know that there are great risks ahead too. We need to create something like 600 million jobs just to keep global unemployment at the level it is today. We know that 1.2 billion of the world's 3.5 billion workers will be affected by automation in some kind of way. So unless we can find a way of sharing the prizes and also controlling the price of automation, then we risk a political future which I think is even more uncertain than many of the political environments that we confront today. And as a country wrestling with Brexit, I feel that with some pain. So what we tried to do with this book is two things, really. One, we wanted to create just a simple agenda that parliamentarians could use around the world to hold governments to account. I found that I didn't know what was the basic list of points that we needed to put to policymakers. So the first task was to come up with a simple 10-point agenda that all of us need to think about in our home parliaments. Second, we wanted to send a very clear message that each of us as parliamentarians has lessons to learn from others around the world. So no matter how advanced our countries are, actually we can learn lessons from absolutely anywhere. And sometimes the lessons that we learn will not simply be from countries, sometimes those lessons will be from cities, the great pioneers of the fourth industrial revolution. So what we've tried to do in the future of work for the people we serve is draw contributions from about 25 of our colleagues who are politicians, they are policymakers, they are parliamentarians, just to underline those 2 points. There is a single agenda that we need to focus on, and there are lessons that we need to learn from everywhere. The first basic lesson is that we need to understand for our own countries how is the impact of automation going to unfold. It will be different in different parts of the world. In our country, in the UK, we know that automation will hit the working class harder than ever. In fact, it could cost 5 times more working class jobs than the shutdown of the coal industry and the steel industry put together. That's an incredible economic shock for many, many communities. But second, we need to understand where the industries of the future will be built, what are our unique strengths, where are their biggest opportunities ahead, and how can we improve the allocative efficiency of our economy by moving resources from low productivity sectors to high productivity sectors. That will be good for productivity growth and good for the growth in living standards for the years to come. Third, there will be a nexus of issues that we've got to crack if we're to create jobs in good ways. So first, we've got to unlock the potential of small businesses. By and large, in most developed economies, it's actually smaller businesses that are creating the largest number of jobs. And jobs will still be the way that we connect the prosperity of individuals to the prosperity of people as a whole. We will have to pay attention to 2 particular groups. So young people, often those people without skills and experience and networks and connections. And second, we will have to all try much harder to raise the level of employment amongst women. Only if we can improve employment rates amongst young people and women can we create some protection against many of the forces, some of the demographic forces like aging populations that many of us are experiencing. Next, if we're to really ensure that new jobs are created at the speed that we need, we will have to make big changes in the way that our capital markets and our labour markets operate. In our capital markets, we need to ensure that financial market reform is genuinely focusing financial institutions on their core purpose, providing a safe haven for savings, but also doing a much better job of matching savings with potential investment. So controlling the kind of gambling that we see in many financial markets, like London, I have to say, we will have to bring forward reforms that don't involve thousands and thousands of pages of regulation, but actually going back to the core purpose of financial systems, I think will be more important in the years to come, and it will be crucial to unlock the investment finance needed to create the firms of the future. Labour markets will need to change in 2 important ways. We will have to create lifelong learning systems in completely new ways, and I have to say that countries like Singapore are leading the way in this regard. But we will also have to develop new ways of protecting people's income over the course of their working life if job change and job churn is going to be much faster in the future than it was in the past. There are then 2 important sets of institutions that will be particularly important for all of us. One will be companies and the other will be cities. New firms have very different corporate governance needs. So the new firms that dominate the internet platforms organised in very different ways to the past. Often the founders have much more power than a distributed group of shareholders. Often the employees will have, although they will own shares, they will have a much more limited voice. So ensuring that corporate governance is fit for the future will be important in making sure that firms behave well in this new economy, including, I might say, paying their taxes efficiently and effectively. And finally, we've included a contribution which I think is really illuminating from the Mayor of Seoul, Pak Won-soon, who makes a really important point that very often the key innovators for reform will not simply be national governments, they will be cities too. And so giving cities the latitude, the freedom to experiment and develop new systems will be an important way of us learning some lessons. The final contribution that we've got in the book is from one of the members of the International Labour Organization Commission on the Future of Work, who finishes the book with an important reflection, which is that in many of our countries, we will have to modernize the social contract if we are to ensure that the future of work offers the promise of inclusive growth. Since the financial crash, the top 1% have done pretty well. They've been growing their wealth at the rate of about 6% a year. That's about twice the rate of everybody else. If that trend persists, by 2030, the top 1% won't own half of global wealth. They will own 2/3 of global wealth. It will be almost impossible to restore any meaningful measure of equality this century unless we ensure the social contract is updated to reflect the different dynamics of capitalism today. So just by way of conclusion, I suppose I'd underline a feeling that many of us has as politicians, which is we no longer live in an era of change. We now live in a change of era. We are now decisively moving into a new industrial revolution. And unless we can create that project hope for automation, then the kind of challenges that we have all experienced from the rise of the extremes, the rise of populism over the last 5 or 6 years will feel like a walk in the park. So this is something where we need, I think, to work together far more closely in the future. We have an awful lot to learn from each other, and we have a lot to lose by trying to fix these problems on our own. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Liam, for all this lesson sharing with our MPs. Now the floor is to Jeremy Lefroy. He's the chair of the Parliamentary Network on the World Bank and the IMF, and I'd like to say a few words that he also founded and runs Equity for Africa, a charitable trust, and self-sustaining by creating jobs through investing in small and medium-sized enterprise.
Thank you all and I'm going to be very brief because firstly, Liam has covered an awful lot of stuff. Secondly, most of what I would want to say is in here anyway, and I want us to have time for questions at the end. But the only thing I will say, or two things, at our parliamentary conference in April, Vjosa, who's with us today, invited me to come to Kosovo as a result of the session we did on youth employment. And I went there 3 weeks ago with a colleague, and it was eye-opening and a very, very good visit. So I want to thank Vjosa for that invitation. And it was learning in two ways. One is I think we will be able, as the Parliamentary Network, to assist, perhaps give some ideas to Vjosa and her colleagues about ways to go. But I also learned a few things from what is going on in Kosovo. One thing in particular was that in Kosovo they've set up an online platform whereby voluntary work can be accredited. So if a young person goes out and does some voluntary work in the community and it's with an accredited organization, they can log that on this online platform, gets logged by the organization. And that means that that work is there for a future employer or a future bank, if they're wanting to finance a small business, to see. I think that's a very interesting idea which perhaps could be adopted by other countries, including my own, because quite often you find that young people are doing an awful lot of this work, but there is no certificate, there is no accreditation, and yet it is very valuable for their future. The second point was I took a group of volunteers to Tanzania in early August, working with young people in schools and on a training course, as well as with small businesses. And it was quite clear to me that it is vital that training for work, preparation for work, starts at a much younger age than it does in most of our countries today, including in my own in the UK. So the whole idea is to ensure that people, even from Standard 6, Standard 7 in primary school, begin to think about business, entrepreneurship, begin to think about the soft skills, the personal skills, the communication skills, in a way that traditional educational curricula do not teach them. And I think that's something that's come out both in this book, it's come out already in the conversations we've had on development of human capital. Olfa, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now I introduce Mr. Mikkel Rutkowski, Senior Director and Head of Global Practice, Social Protection Jobs at the World Bank Group.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Sherif. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear parliamentarians. Let me start by thanking for being invited to this very important annual event or even biannual event. And let me say that I am very much in agreement with what we heard from Liam and on the future of work. I want to congratulate you on having such a formidable production here. I think I agree with all the 10 lessons, as well as in the fact that it is not unreasonable to think that we are moving from the era of change to the change of era, as Liam put it forward. What I would like to do this afternoon is to very briefly present to you main findings of the World Development Report on the changing nature of work, treated as a sneak preview. I think there should be a presentation moving, so I hope you will see it. The moment I see it, I'll be able to move slides. I ask for help in the meantime. The World Development Report will be online and will be officially launched only on Friday, later this week. So take it as a sign of importance of the parliamentary network that I'm here to give you a sneak preview of main messages that are coming. And first and foremost, what I would like to say is, for your information, that this World Development Report was really produced in a very, very open manner, with new versions taking on board comments from various stakeholders appearing every Friday in an updated version. So it was almost a crowdsourced type writing of WDR, and it enjoys more than 350,000 downloads by now, which is a lot for our publications, and will be published later this week. Now, getting to the substance, and please remember, this is a generalized view of the world, so everything I'm going to say, but none in entirety will fit the circumstances of your countries. But let me first talk about the big framing of the report. And I think this big framing is something we can all relate to, which is the big fight, the global fight between automation and innovation. So what you see in this graph is that on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you have employment, and then on the x-axis you have sectors, both old and new, in the economy. And what we observe is, indeed, as we often read about, as we often see, a lot of jobs being lost to the automation process, and at the same time, a lot of new jobs appearing due to innovation, jobs usually that did not exist before, that are new ones and that are straight results of innovation. So in a way, when we go down to job counting, will there be more jobs or less jobs? This is, in the simplest possible frame, this fight which we are witnessing. What is important, however, is really to realize, even for those of us who believe that what we see now has never been seen before, it is still useful to see to think about what we saw before. And what we saw before, we saw a lot of phases of technological progress like that. And the most probably often quoted is the Luddites revolution in the industrial era, where there was a huge fear of the loss of jobs which will not be in any way compensated. And as we all know, it proved not to be true. Not only there were many job losses, but new jobs appeared, and those jobs were jobs of higher productivity, were performed with more ease by people, but required a difficult transition period. Even if we look at something closer to our times, probably if you look at institutions that employ people doing work of assistance. In 5, 6 institutions I've worked for last 35 years. I primarily worked for the World Bank, but I also worked for the London School of Economics, for the government of Poland. What I wanted to tell you is that the share of assistants' jobs is exactly the same now as it was 30 years ago, except that those assistants do things of much higher productivity and less effort. And there are more examples like that, but I would like you to think in terms of that particular struggle between automation and innovation. This is what the World Development Report puts forward. Now, that obviously creates huge turbulence, and this turbulence could be looked at through many lenses. Here is a look through the skills that are needed in the changing world of work. You have a very simple distinction between non-routine cognitive in orange, routine cognitive in blue, and manual in red. And you would not be surprised, these are data for Europe, because only for Europe they exist to that extent. You see a significant drop of share of workers doing manual work, and an increase in share of cognitive work, both routine and non-routine. And this is a change which, among other things, means that those who do this cognitive work do jobs of higher productivity and less physical effort. However, those who lose jobs because they are not able anymore to do manual jobs enter a period of a difficult transition and difficult adjustment. The importance of non-routine skills, and more broadly soft skills and social-emotional skills, could be proven through many ways. Here, this slide shows to you the recent job advertisements on 3 different types of jobs: genetic counselors in US and Canada, data labelers in China, and apps developers in India. And in addition to obvious skills, which you would expect for all these kinds of jobs, which you usually see in the upper part, like the master's degree in genetics or proficiency in internet use, you also see in each and every of them the emphasis on critical thinking skills, on decision-making, on working effectively as a team member, on analytical communication and interpersonal skills, on willingness to learn, on teamwork. And it is even for data laborers in China, this is what appears in ads, which is a sea change compared to what we saw several years ago. I think the other important element when one looks at the current wave of changes, what makes it the change of era as opposed to era of change, sorry for borrowing from what I heard, but I liked it a lot, is the fact that the previous revolutionary developments had a slower pace in terms of how firms accelerated their growth. Here you can compare IKEA, absolutely a big success worldwide, and you have a certain points marked. For instance, when first IKEA store in 1973 was set up outside Scandinavia. But you see an impressive growth of IKEA, 450 stores in 49 countries. But this growth pales compares to Walmart. And Walmart pales compares to platforms such as Amazon or Taobao that is listed here, which is essentially an Amazon of China. And you see in a very rapid growth and extremely quick technological advance that influences the growth of the firm. It is useful, and one of the graphs in the World Development Report, which you will see on Friday, compares how those new superstar firms or platforms, it's essentially the same, how they compare to traditional operators in exactly the same segment of the market. And you would see, the medium comparison, depending on what you are more interested in, those who travel a lot may be interested in Airbnb versus Marriott and Hilton together in terms of how many rooms they offer. But then for those who are really interested in banking, who would see a traditional KCB bank vis-a-vis very, very famous M-Pesa in Kenya, and license taxis versus Ubers or Didi Chuxing, there is an enormously quick growth of platforms which dwarf the importance in the same market of traditional operators. What is the lesson from that? The lesson is very important, and World Development Report talks much more about it, and here I will not have time to cover that. But we observe less and less standard, typical employment contracts, long-term contracts, and more short-term work often done through online work platforms. So we have a situation in which we have a very quickly growing freelancer population, still remaining small, less than 3% of the global labor force, but very quickly growing. And this is, we can now speculate whether that means that if the pace of growth is as fast as it is a revolutionary change. Now, what is important in this simple slide are in fact, first and second bullet. There is the systems in the world for years, especially systems of providing people with social protection, were very much based on the assumption of the standard long-term employment contract for the individuals, either as a reality in developed countries or as an aspiration in developing countries. The point which I want to make here is that as a reality in developed countries, it is less relevant than it was because of the growth of non-standard employment and platforms. And in developing world or in emerging economies, you see on this graph, it has never been a majority of workers. Basically, more than 60%, 64.7% still operate in informal settings, and countries that had 90% informal sector 40 years ago, like Nepal or India, are more or less in the same neighborhood now. So our long-standing hope that we will have social progress and economic progress through formalization may be actually completely misplaced. It has never been true. We've never been able to deliver on that, but now it is even less so as a point of aspiration, given the demise of standard employment contract as a basic point of reference in developed countries because of development of superstars and platforms. So I think there is a lot to think about, and the World Development Report concludes that there are three main areas for policy action. The first is investment in human capital and lifelong learning, and I already touched upon that, how important it is to develop new skills related to this quick change, including soft skills, and you will hear more from colleagues of mine later this afternoon on the human capital project of the World Bank Group, precisely focused on that. The second area is social protection and labor policies. They need to change. They cannot rely on the assumption of a one standard employer, one standard employment contract for a lifetime, as many systems were created. It needs to disassociate, it needs to focus on individuals who may be in different labor market statuses at different points of lives, and they need to be protected. And all that needs to be financed through new approach to revenue mobilization, which the World Development Report elaborates on. Finally, let me end on the social protection point, maybe with my deep affinity to the topic as a senior director for social protection and jobs. What the World Development Report highlights is essentially what you see in this core, smallest concentric circle, guaranteed social minimum. Too long, we thought of the social protection systems as being really linked to employment and not available if you are in between jobs, if you are in job search, if you operate in an informal sector, or if you are a platform operator. What the World Development Report is highlighting is the need to have the minimum that is independent from the employment status. And how this minimum looks like may be very different in different countries, may be very different what it means in East Birmingham, than it is in Kenya, and then what is in Indonesia. And this minimum in some countries may end up being a universal basic income. It is, however, very unlikely to be a prevailing mode in most of emerging economies, which would have to rely on guaranteed minimum income or minimum packages of different sorts. And both the World Development Report itself and an upcoming study on the risk sharing in a diverse and diversifying world of work, which will be produced later this year in the World Bank, delves into details of those concentric circles, starting with the minimum and then moving to those which are less mandatory, more optional, more based on incentivizing individuals to insure themselves against the risks of related to working and non-working life.
Thank you, Michael, for this fruitful presentation. Mr. Helge, Assistant Director of Research Department at the IMF. Now the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much also to my previous presenting colleagues, which covered, I think, important points, and I can reinforce some of them as we go along. So what I will try to do is highlight 3 points that are based on publications that the IMF has put forward on, first, the future of work, and then there's some ongoing work which will be published reasonably soon on youth unemployment. And one of the arguments I'm going to make is that there's a link between facilitating these technological advances, which we hope will make a change to our economies and raise productivity across countries, and the need to adjust to these changes in the right way. And on the third, in making sure that the youth, that younger people participate and actually spearhead that kind of change. So why is it so important that we also link this discussion to the young, right? First, getting it wrong can be extremely costly. And second, there's an enormous upside opportunity of getting it right. So why is it so costly thinking about this and ignoring the youth? This is, an insight that research in recent years has stressed, that for economies overall, recessions and long periods of low growth can be dangerous. Unemployment tends to be sticky. Once it's high, it tends to be high for long. And what's really problematic is that this translates into individual destinies, that this comes down to a personal level for many, especially young people who enter employment in an area of low growth, high unemployment and low wages, sort of tend to carry the scar for their entire work career. And I think so it's crucial that we get this right. And if we do get it right, this is a tremendous opportunity. So if we make sure that the young people that we're worried about participate and actually, lead technological change, then we are about to benefit. So why is that relevant that we treat the young right? One is that it tends to be the young people that carry this new information into the workplace and into the larger economies. And we have to have the engineers in place to help us write these algorithms that make us more productive going forward. But you also have to have this holistic mindset in the workplace, where people can understand how these new technologies are going to be introduced and used. Because it's one thing to have the technology, and another thing is to make use of it in a way that actually increases productivity. And here, I think we agree that that's also a lesson from economic history in general. The steam engine at the beginning was just a unique experiment. It took a while for it to actually make a difference in the economy across the world. But we don't only have to work to adjust to these technological advances. We also have to, just to facilitate it. We also have to make sure we make the best of it. And I think you mentioned already, the important fact that we cannot expect the future workplace to look exactly like today's. There will be shorter careers with individual firms. There will be much more frequent job change. And so social security systems that currently focus on protecting workers in their place or at their place of employment will have to transform into systems that protect the people rather than particular jobs. As jobs will be changing, people will be changing jobs, and tasks will look different. So we need to protect people rather than particular job descriptions in the workplace. And this is, I think, a crucial thing to keep in mind when we worry about what the role of the young people is. Because I think we're not starting from a position of strength exactly when it comes to young people in the global economy. Overall, it's well known that young people tend to have higher rates of unemployment, lower rates of employment than more adult people. And here young people are broadly defined of those who are younger than 24 and older than 15. And unfortunately, if we look across countries, there's also some significant heterogeneity. We know that emerging markets tend to perform slightly less well than advanced economies. Now, you all know your countries much better than I could possibly do, so I'm speaking in general terms. So what is it that we know? We know that the inactivity rate, that is the rate of young people who are not in employment, not in education, and not currently receiving training, is about 10% for advanced economies, which is already rather high. But on average, for a large group of emerging markets where we can do this kind of analysis, much higher, about 20%. So the issue is a little bit more concerning for many of the emerging countries. Equally, youth unemployment tends to be higher than in emerging markets than in advanced economies, and that is something one needs to take into consideration here. All of this is, of course, becoming more important if you have, in general, a younger population in the workforce, as emerging markets have relative to advanced economies. And so one of the calculations we have recently done, which will be in forthcoming work on youth unemployment in developing and emerging markets, is that just lowering or increasing the rate of activity of young people in emerging markets to the levels of advanced economies, and again we're talking averages here, could lift GDP in emerging markets by about 5%. That is a relevant level. So what are we to do? I think you rightly emphasized, all of you emphasized rightly, education. And in all the work that we have done on the future of work, we find education tremendously important. I mean, there are a couple of reasons. But perhaps the most important one is that education is a way, first, to help facilitate the change that we think new technologies can bring. And second, it's also an extremely powerful way of making sure that these changes will be benefiting everybody. So if we manage to elevate the skills of those, as we just discussed, who will see their jobs changed most, right? We will put them in a position to help themselves, but we also put them in a position to participate in that increase in growth that we hope the new technologies will give us. I think where we still can have a discussion is what that means. Yes, we need to make sure that education to help make use of new technology starts early, but I think it's also important that it lasts long. So secondary and tertiary education seem to matter a lot when we think about those engineers and others who develop new technologies, but it also matters for those who are going to tell us and teach us how to use these new technologies to make the best use of them. And this is a potentially powerful instrument. If you make assumptions, and we all speculating here about the future, about the benefits of these new technologies, and you look at the, in simulations that you can do using, hopefully accurate models, you can ask what is the benefit for those with low skills, and you can show that by helping them to increase their skill levels, their average income growth could be just significantly higher, up to 4 times higher in some of these simulations, if we manage to help them acquire additional education, and that is even if you include the need to finance this educational spending, which as far as the IMF is concerned, as far as ministers of finance are concerned, is of course a crucial element here. So what else do we do? We need to look at structural policies In general, we find interesting that the kind of reforms we recommend for labor markets and product market reform, for example, make product markets more open to new entries of firms, the kind of suggestions we have been making all along with the view on the current state of affairs also remains relevant as we speculate about the future. So having protection for people rather than jobs, allowing firms to enter product markets more easily will help the young, but it will also help those who are more grown up in the labor market. So I think that's an important element here. There's no trade-off. It's just that the young predominantly benefit from these reforms relative to the old. Maybe one final point here. It's important to understand that some of this dynamic that we're hoping will come about with technological change actually gets helped if we do it and implement it in a global trade regime that is open, because productivity tends to travel between countries through trade. So if we all want to partake in what others are achieving in terms of productivity increases, that's a way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So many challenges that we have to face as politicians and members of parliament. And I'd like to stress one comment with Mr. Mike, investing more in people than in work, protecting people than in work. How now that the world is changing and the era of change at the technological level and digital level, how at the social level? I really like the idea to give a minimum social protection to everyone, wherever he's working. And it's a way to bring the informal economy to the formal one by protecting those people and also protecting the young. This will be one of new social contracts. But we have maybe to think about it in a new area, in the future of work, in a digital maybe, or more flexible, giving to people the chance to change from a job to another, but always having this coverage at the social level. Would you mind give us?
Olfa, it was a wonderful summary. I would say a brilliant one. I would not be able to summarize it so well what you did. It only encourages me to say the following, to expand on what you say, which is that too long, perhaps, especially given the recent wave of technological change, we see that too long we really thought that strong social protection and labor market flexibility are contradictory, that they cannot be lived together. And we very often thought, or I sometimes fell into the trap of thinking, okay, if we provide labor market flexibility, which is so much needed, especially given the technological change, given demographic trends, given social change, even given climate change, when people will need to move, change jobs, all those trends, not only technology calls for that. We need flexible labor markets. But that doesn't mean at all that we should weaken social protection. Just the opposite. We need even stronger social protection, but social protection that is not based on the assumption that people do have or people will have one standard employment contracts over their lifetime, and they will be doing the same thing. So in a way, we need to marry those two things, ability for labor markets to adjust, and for that to happen successfully, we need even stronger social contract that protects people who will be affected by those changes. And I think this is exactly where the rubber hits the road, where the name of the game is. So thank you for that comment. I fully agree.
Thank you. Yes, please.
When you started, the thought that I had, finally the World Bank sounds like the IMF. But no, I think no. But let me stress the basic agreement we have on this. So it's about protecting people and not jobs. But let me add one important element here. What this specifically means, this phrase, which I think is a powerful phrase, but what this specifically means for each of your countries is a completely different question. If a social protection system is organized nationally and not at a firm level, right? This, you're practically there. There's, the protection of people is easily kept up during technological change. If, however, your social protection system is very firm-based, and your access to pension and healthcare and unemployment benefits, are based on your employer-employee relationships, then I think, these social frameworks are worth to be looked at.
Thank you very much. Now we open the session for the questions. Please, Riosa.
I actually don't have a question, but maybe just to add a point to what Mr. Berger said about why is it so important to work on fighting unemployment, especially among young people, and including young people in this entire investment in human capital. And this mostly is important for those countries that have a high rate of unemployment among their youngsters. I would say that a big percentage of unemployed young people is also a potential for unrest, both political and social unrest in a country. It creates potential for radicalization among the young generation. And finally, it increases the percentage of immigrants in a certain country, which then has an impact not only in that country, but also other countries to where those young men and women are immigrating. So practically not fighting unemployment among the young people is not only the right thing to do, but it can be extremely dangerous for the country not to do it. So that's what I wanted to add.
Please, Morocco.
Yes, thank you. My question is to Mr. Lotkowski. It's related to what we call the new superstar firms and the job creation in developing countries. Job creation related also to new technology, given the fact that those superstar firms are now platforms. They are using data collected everywhere as a raw materials. Not every SMEs or new firm has access to those data, and they can profit from it and create new jobs. So my question is that, will we see in the future like a shift, like multi-skilled jobs go into developed countries, since those superstar firms are in developed countries, and having also less skilled jobs created or go into less developed countries? Thank you.
Thank you. Nepal.
Thank you. This question probably goes to Michael Lotkowski, to the bank. We did a lot of PRSPs, poverty reduction strategy papers. Many of the plan documents of the countries were what they were following based on what was recommended in the PRSPs. Do you not, at the hindsight, think that PRSPs did not emphasize job creation as much as it should have been? It talked about development broadly and took it for granted that as the development happens, as the growth happens, jobs will be created at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Portugal.
Then Malaysia, please. Yeah, thank you. I'll have to go first, all right.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for this interesting panel. I have some remarks and a few questions. Let me start by saying that I am also leader in my country of the labor organization inside my party. So this issue of the future of work, it is very important to me, and is very. I was very passionate with this subject. Also because this is the ILO launched the future of the work in occasion of the commemoration of his centenary initiative. It is very important. So the remarks that some ideas I think they are important. Education and training are key in order to create high-skilled workers. So high-skilled workers have more perspective to survive on this new economy, on the future of the work. Also, to not be afraid of the future. You have mentioned the question of Luddites in the 19th century when they burned the looms in England. But the recent history shows that when there is a crisis, there is also a time of opportunities. So in this case, we can create many new jobs. This represents also a great opportunity. So my question is regarding the funding of the social security. With these changes in the economy, how can you predict the funding to fund the social security? Because on these days, at least in Europe, social security is funded by the payroll taxes taxed on wages of the workers. And last question, what will be the effect of the traditional relation between capital and work? I mean, at level of the collective bargaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Malaysia, please.
Thank you. I would like to give an example of Malaysia because we realized that the rise of youth unemployment rate in Malaysia was mainly due to the increase in the number of unemployment graduates. And this happened despite the fact that the Malaysian government made a huge investment, especially in education and training program. And the investment is the biggest investment every year during the budget. So I would like to ask the speakers if you can probably share with us as parliamentarian how can we solve this predicament through a comprehensive policy, probably introducing some policy in the House, in the Parliament House, for us to bring back in order for us to solve this mismatch skilled workers in Malaysia itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
5 more minutes, okay?
Okay, Morocco.
Olfa, can I defer to my colleague from Morocco from the other side of the table, please?
I'm going to move to Indonesia first. The last question will be for George.
Thank you very much, my colleague Lesson.
Sorry. سامحني يا الخو. أما إندونيسيا خاطر هما مضايفيننا قبلك ومن بعد الأردن.
Thank you. Learning from Indonesian's case, as it's written here, that we would enjoy sort of what is referred as a demographic bonus. We have such a young population, but on the other hand, you know, the digitalization of the economy creates a higher entry barrier to workforce. I think I like to share something with you that is also essential to promote the entrepreneurships within the younger generations or the new workforce coming into the labor market. The latest industrial revolution, the Industry 4.0, has definitely created a higher entry barrier, which requires higher skill and fully automated economy. So it's not really a question from us. It's just that I think it is essential to boost and keep promoting entrepreneurships within younger populations, especially in the developing economies to mitigate the risks of younger generation or new workforce coming into new labor market being unemployed. Thank you.
Thank you. Jordan, and after Morocco. Jordan first.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this session. I think that the issue is all regarding the competitiveness and productivity. The digital revolution will not go backward. It will always be ahead of us. Who should follow who? I mean, the unemployment levels is growing, and if we want really to focus on decreasing unemployment, that means we should follow the digital revolution. The competitiveness and productivity is the main aim for the private sectors. So they will not look at principles, they will look at their own margins, their own profits. That means if we need to educate the human resource, we need to make sure the education and the new technology is being assigned to them so that they can be a real factor in the future of technology. Unless we do this preparation for each and every country, especially the countries with more unemployment levels, the private sector will not carry the responsibility for them. So first we have to educate and prepare the humans, because as I said, we should follow the revolution of digitalization. We cannot compete unless we are really able and we are ready for that. So that's what IMF and World Bank should focus, especially in countries that need to compete with their productivity with big nations, big countries, big economies. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have just 6 minutes, so 1 minute will be for Morocco.
Okay, Madame la Présidente. Sorry, I will use the language of Molière. Put your translators. Bon, c'est vrai. Bon, je voudrais juste réagir à.
I just want to react to what has been said. Maybe I could give you a chance to put on your headsets. In my opinion, the issue of employment is quite complex and also structural. From my point of view, we need to look at it from two standpoints. First of all, supply. And when we talk about supply, this is also related to the growth rate and also the business climate. But having said that, it's not always growth that leads to greater employment. You need to have inclusive growth. The higher growth is, if you don't have inclusiveness, you can still have problems. So there needs also to be a good fit between training and jobs that are available. For example, we need to teach our children in business schools. We need to link the schools with the private sector. I share what was said by Monsieur Berger, that when productivity increases, jobs fall, job levels fall. An increase in productivity in textiles meant that the number of jobs fell by from 600,000. And let me conclude, technology is very useful. There's a great deal of there are many things that are positive about technology, but there are also risks involved. Thank you.
Your turn. We can start. Jeremy, would you like to say a few words? No, it's okay. So.
All right. Thanks for letting me go first. So what I like about this discussion, I appreciate all of your comments, is that you seem to be ready to make that next step from understanding what the basic underlying forces are at work to thinking about what does it mean for in terms of adjusting policies and policy frameworks in all of your countries. And so, you know, I think it's a very important question that came from the Portuguese colleague to ask, what does all this mean for the way we finance social security? It's also a very good question, what does it mean for ensuring collective bargaining rights where they exist? So I think that is crucial. Now, what the answer ever will depend on where you are currently. So a social security system that is mostly tax-based, you know, is perfectly fine, you know, going forward. A social security system that, as you say, in many countries is still based on wage contributions and, you know, matching social contributions from employers, you know, there we will have to think about what, you know, what a world where most of the contracting is task-based and rather than job-based, you know, means. And then clearly, you know, one solution would be, one has to look at this more carefully, but one solution is clearly to move to a financing that is tax-based rather than social security-based. Collective bargaining, if we have concerns about you know, adequate pricing of tasks because we have a gig economy that is employing more and more people. Mind you, today there's not too many, but you know, this will become more important, many people think. Then, you know, there's a question that could be either a collective wage bargaining problem, or it could be a product market regulation competition problem. You can, but wherever you are, that's the next step. These are specific questions that you need to ask. And another important point came in the last contribution in this area. You know, it's crucial that we move from understanding that technologies will shape a different future of work than we have today to the next logical conclusion. That is, that if we need to if we want to enable our people to participate in higher productivity growth, that we sort of tailor these skills to the needs that corporations and firms have. And there are a number of really exciting experiments that are ongoing across the world, from the Netherlands to Singapore and many other countries, where people we move, especially in the lifelong learning segment of this, where we move from a rigorous, unmovable curriculum to demand-driven skill improvement, where, for example, employees have a budget that they can spend over a number of years, in areas that are elaborated on and defined in cooperation with businesses. So a lot to learn from other countries, and I think you are on the right path there. Thank you.
Thank you for all your questions. I try in a very telegraphic pace to respond to them. So first, the questions from Portugal. I fully agree with Helge, and the well-development report emphasizes it. We need the broadest possible tax base to finance social security. Reliance on payroll taxes is a matter of the past. In the first place, it always creates anti-labor distortion, and especially nowadays, it is definitely needed to move to the much broader tax base. On bargaining, which you said, I think the problem with bargaining is that it is all the time only tripartite. If you think about it, you would think of a structure that involves 5 groups, those that are in the tripartite, but also workers in non-standard employment contracts and those who do not have jobs. The problem with current bargaining is how that can evolve so that it starts covering those participants of the labor market who need to be represented that are not represented nowadays. PRSPs, thank you, from Nepal, this question. I think in PRSPs we were not properly explicit about jobs. We were not clear that we care about access, quality and quantity. While caring about all the 3, we accept that the end result must be a job, however informal, however part-time, however not a good job, it's still a job, and we need to work towards improving the quality and access. I think now, if we were writing PRSPs now, we would be much more explicit about this part, so I'm very grateful you pointed that out. Superstar firms, Yes, reshoring is a real threat, but at the same time, with the access to internet, education, and skills, there is nothing cast in stone that there will be a reshoring. The same competitive advantage is possible even with operating platforms for countries that are not in the most affluent countries of the world. That, however, requires investment in many things, ranging from internet access to skills. On the comment from Kosovo I found very, very interesting, and this is sort of too much getting into detail, which well-developed report doesn't cover, but you talked about youth unemployment. And the way we think about it in the World Bank, we talked about positive externalities of employing youth. And we divide them into labor externalities and social externalities. Labor are the fact that there is a lot of learning happening on the job. So if you do not have jobs, they don't learn. Actually, there is even increasing evidence that bad jobs do not provide a setting for learning as much as good jobs. So the externality is there, and there is a chapter in WDR on lifelong learning and on learning on the job, which you may find interesting. But the second is what you talked about, social externalities. By having a job, the youth are much less likely to get involved in activities we don't want them to be involved, and this is an excellent point. And I think finally, I just wanted to say that I very much agree with comments coming from Portugal and Morocco, especially on the fact that demographic dividend is not given, and it requires investment in skills and investment in social policies, changes in fertility rates in order to reap the benefits. And I very much agree on the need that skills and employers, training and employers need to be brought together. Otherwise, there is a risk of training in professions that are not needed in the market. And this is how I read the very valuable comment from Morocco. And again, I also agree very much with the Jordan comment on the value of education. Thank you again very much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for all your contributions. I think the most important is to create jobs, informal, formal, skilled, unskilled, cognitive, whatever. But this is the way how to reach inclusive growth for everyone. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, we now move on to our next session on women's participation in economic growth. Just to say that our keynote speaker, the Chief Executive of the World Bank, Kristalina Georgieva, is going to speak to us at 3:30. So we will start with our moderator and our two speakers before that. Thank you. Colleagues, we're about to start the next session. Thank you very much. If you could take your seats, please.
Well, I am the moderator. My name is Kumar Ketkar. I am from India, Member of Parliament, Upper House. But that is only for last 6 months I have been a Member of Parliament. Before that, for nearly 40 years, I have been in the media, working in newspapers and sometimes on television. So my role will be both today also, as a moderator, as an ex-media person, and as MP. So I begin with introduction of the two panelists, because the third panelist will come at 3:30, and all of us will observe the discipline of time and will close this part of the session before she comes at 3:30. So I have with me Evita, who is she is Evita Nursanti. She was first elected to Parliament in 2009 and is now a member of the Commission 1, which deals with defense, foreign affairs and information. She received a doctorate in her international relations from the University of, how do you pronounce it, Padjaran, and her master's degree in architecture and tourism from Gajah Mada University. She also holds a diploma in general business from Cabrillo College of California, USA. So the topic that is going to be discussed is truly interesting and at the same time extremely serious, because generally it is not adequately recognized the role of women in economy. Often the discussion is more about their social status, but economic role has not been adequately identified. In India, the problem is still very serious because many of the girl child do get killed early in their early years, and sometimes when the mothers are pregnant, the girl child is aborted. So the discrimination against girls and against women begins at a very early stage, and earlier when the unemployment figures were published, at least for first 2 decades, nobody thought that women, 18-year-old woman upwards, should be regarded as able and unemployed. So unemployment figures also did not really figure women adequately. The second problem was the agricultural women, those women who directly work as laborers in agriculture or are involved in agriculture, were also not included in the unemployment figures. So there was a lot of distortion in understanding employment, unemployment and their economic role. I think that has changed considerably now, but even in many countries, that kind of discrimination, social, economic, cultural and political discrimination does exist. Like in Parliament in India, there has been a demand that 33% at least there should be women MPs. But unfortunately, that has not been passed by a male-dominated or patriarchal system-dominated Parliament as well as patriarchal-dominated system of political parties. So actually, it looks like a long way ahead for the feminist movement or the feminist cause or the women's role. But since 1975, when the feminist movement took shape all over the world, thanks to Kate Millett, Germaine Greer and many feminist Firestone, many feminist leaders, even then it has not taken full sort of command of the society and economy all over the world. Strangely, in India, the feminist movement is very strong, but the actual result, positive result, in terms of having their role defined and implemented is extremely limited. That is unfortunate. The note here that is given to me by World Bank actually gives a very disturbing analysis. Like it says that closing gaps in all aspects between men and women globally will lead to a stronger impact of tackling poverty and boost inclusive and sustainable economic growth for all. We have been discussing since morning the relationship of poverty and the people and society and so on, and technology and employment. But in particular, this particular session will now look into differences in earning affect countries' economic well-being. A recent study by the World Bank found that globally countries are losing $160 trillion, that's $160 trillion in wealth alone because of differences in lifetime earnings between women and men. This amounts to an average of $23,620 for each person in the 141 countries studied by the World Bank Group on this subject. The IMF research also shows that closing gender gap will result in greater equality, stability and a positive fiscal and budgetary impact on client countries. Raising female labor force, therefore, participation rates to male levels could boost gross domestic product by 5% in the US, 9% in Japan, and 27% in my country, that is India. So that can explain the discrimination and unfortunate diversity. The discussion will also complement this particular thing, the World Bank and IMF efforts in exercising their gender strategy at various levels. I personally consider myself lucky. My wife is a feminist movement activist, and therefore I am familiar with this problem right from my home. So by making these initial remarks, I think let us begin discussion. So I will ask first Ms. Evita to make her statement, and soon after that will be Rhoda Wicks Brown. At that time I'll intervene again. Evita, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ketkar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First, allow me to extend my sincere appreciation to the Parliamentary Network to accommodate this gender issue into this Bali meeting. It is a timely situation that we discuss women participation in economy, because today more women have significant contribution on sustainable economic and inclusive growth. Women undoubtedly have the potential to contribute more to global economy, as it is estimated by International Labour Organization in 2017 that 865 million women could play their role significantly. Furthermore, the women's participation have proven to stimulate wider benefit where women could empower their family and society. But despite this promising potential, women still face various setbacks that hinders them to participate in global economy. In this respect, with the spirit of leaving no one behind, Indonesia has embarked in a serious measure to improve women's equality and their roles in the economy through education, improving access to finance, and capacity building. Ensuring education for women and girls will play a critical role in driving continuous improvement in women participation in economy. As it was mentioned earlier in this morning session by our coordinating minister, Indonesia have implemented compulsory education for 9 years, which is exceeded the MDGs target. Ensured the equal access to education for women and engaging women in technology and information so they can contribute to digital economy, the economy of the future. In terms of the global economy, women should be able to reap the benefits of financial technology, where it is 2.5 billion people across the globe without access to the basic bank accounts. Financial technology has more advantages for women to increase financial inclusion and give more flexibility over their financial control. Indonesia efforts have shown that the financial inclusion rate has reached 67.8%, in which 127 million of Indonesians had utilized and accessed financial products and services, which is beneficial for women across nations. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, empowering women economically, especially engaging them in trading, will create job opportunities for everyone. One of many ways to engage women in trade is through connecting them, especially women entrepreneurs, to the global value chain and ensuring them to enjoy the best economic benefits from international trade. Data from the International Trade Center shows that SMEs contribute to creating 80% of global job opportunities, in which almost 10 million of world's small and medium-sized enterprises are owned by women. In Indonesia, ADB revealed that women own 35% of Indonesia's small and medium-sized enterprises. The most recent data from the Ministry of Cooperative and Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises of Indonesia shows that women who run SMEs has grew rapidly, with 60% of the current SMEs are managed by women. However, despite SME being the engine of growth, women often gain less profit from the multiplier effect of SMEs growth and continue to bear disproportionate burden of poverty. Furthermore, women often face challenges and setbacks in running SME. Finding from OECD that confirm the challenge is faced by women is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurial activities of women are still hampered by constraints that often tend to be gender-specific, such as social convention, legal and institutional framework, unemployment opportunities, as it was mentioned as well by the moderator just now, work-life balance, and consequently restricted access to finance. In this respect, Indonesia has conducted various training and capacity building for women entrepreneurs and small business owners. For example, empowerment program for local startup business entrepreneurs and empowerment program for women head of household to increase women capacity in entrepreneurship and trade. Through increased capacity, financial independence, and equal economic opportunity, it is expected that women will open access to job creation for people in their surrounding and contribute to strengthen the global economy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to mention that the Sustainable Development Goals prioritize women participation in economic growth. The global commitment aims to improve women participation in economy through gender-responsive policy. In saying that, I would like to underline that Sustainable Development Goals should be the basis of our national policy and incorporated into a national planning process and strategies. Our own national targets shall refer to the global level of ambition, but of course, taking into account national circumstances. We in Parliament shall continuously monitor to ensure its implementation. I want to end by applauding women's leaders and parliamentarians who tirelessly and continuously made a change by strengthening their participation on politics and encouraging women to contribute in the economy so they can play a significant role in national development. I thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I'll request Ms. Rhoda Weeks-Brown to make her presentation, and I'll introduce her briefly. She is IMF General Counsel and Director of the Legal Department, and during her career in the Fund's Legal Department, she has worked on a wide range of country and policy issues. She was particularly involved in leading the work related to the revamp of the Fund's General Resource Account. That led to toolkit and a transformation of the architecture of facilities for low-income countries. She also contributed to the design of new income model for the fund adopted in 2008. 2008 and 2010 quota and governance reforms and the articulation of funds in institutional views on capital flows. In her role as Deputy General Counsel, she was a key member of the legal department's management team, helping to guide all aspects of the department's work. Most recently, she has served as Deputy Director of the Funds Commission Communications Department, where she has played a major role in development of the fund's communication strategy and its positioning on key issues. And I also had oversight of communication related to Europe, Africa, and other countries. Now, I just want to make a small intervention before I hand over to her, that unfortunately, the aspect of cultural impact in various societies has not been directly understood in context of economic growth. And the cultural inequality between men and women in societal conditions has affected hugely. For instance, in India, the ratio between men and women in some states is between 850 women to 1,000 men. And all these kinds of, this is the beginning of, from infantile level, the discrimination. And that cultural aspect, essentially, that boy must be the inheritor of property, of legacy, of wealth, everything. That kind of cultural aspect is dominating so much today, particularly in India. I am not sure about other societies, that it leads finally everywhere to income inequality, to wages inequality, to family inequality. For instance, Kate Millett and Germaine Greer have identified how much of the housework is actually monetized or paid, understood in terms of its ability of paid housework, and not, woman doesn't get leave during housework, she is certainly not paid, and she is not adequately monetized for the work. And still, the responsibility of raising children and managing families is hers. In this context, the work that Ms. Rhoda Wicks-Brown has done is quite significant. I am sure IMF has equal wage policy in men and women employees. So, may I request you to make your presentation?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ketkar. And thank you, Ibu Evita, for that excellent speech you just gave. And I just want to say thanks, and what an honor and a pleasure it is for us to be here this afternoon with all of you members of parliament from all of our member countries. It's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to talk very briefly in the short amount of time allowed, and then I'm happy to answer questions also. But just to say a little bit about what the IMF has been doing in this area, focusing mainly on some of our recent research, but also some of our more specific, country-specific work in this area. So as we've already heard, and as Ibu Evita just covered also, these issues of women's empowerment, there's different ways you can approach them. Obviously, this is a key human rights issue. It's a significant issue for the SDGs, and SDG 5 in particular is one of my favorite SDGs. From the IMF's perspective, our focus on gender issues is primarily from the macroeconomic side of it. That's our mandate, that's what we do, and that's the way we approach it. And of course, all of these different ways of looking at the gender issue all come together, and we are complementary of each other in any case. The fact that, that increasing women's empowerment, women's economic empowerment, increasing women's participation in the economy, increasing, if you had equal levels of participation between women and between men, the sort of results that can come from that, that's been one of the big focus of our research. And I just mentioned, maybe start by mentioning just some of the statistics. Again, Mr. Ketkar already referred to some of our earlier research, but even more recent research where we've looked at these issues in a more recent time frame at some specific countries, and where we can see that raising women's labor force participation to the same level as male labor force participation in a country like Pakistan could increase GDP by over 30%, in countries like Niger by over 32%, in Iran the calculation was 40%, Jordan was 45%, even in Canada, significant gains in the order of about 2% of GDP. Again, these are in recent IMF reports, and there's many other countries, I just mentioned those few. In sub-Saharan Africa, a 10% decrease in gender inequality could boost growth by 2 percentage points over the next 5 years. Again, pretty significant numbers for all of these countries I've just mentioned. So these macroeconomic benefits are clear. We have new research coming out tomorrow, actually, and maybe in this context, I should also make a plug for a seminar that would be at the IMF across the street at the, I believe it's at the Convention Center tomorrow. Our managing director is on a seminar focused on gender issues, focused on exactly these issues. Ibu Sri Mulyani, the Minister of Finance from Indonesia, will be there also. Vera Sungway from the UN Commission for Africa, and also Ms. Priyanthi Fernando, who's from the women's, it's called the International Women's Rights Action Watch, which is a NGO very active on gender issues in the Asia Pacific. But anyway, I just mentioned that seminar. This new research that we're issuing tomorrow shows that these gains from having greater gender equality are even greater than we had initially calculated, because some of the new research the IMF is doing is now finding that bringing women into the workforce actually gives you much bigger effects than if you were to have brought men into the same positions, because women bring additional views, basically the benefits of having that greater diversity are much greater. And that, of course, ends up impacting everyone, not just the women that are added to the workforce, but also men, these benefits of greater productivity. I won't say much more about that research because, again, it is being published tomorrow, but it's part of the work we've been doing. Quickly to mention that another aspect of our work has also focused on issues of income inequality and the link to gender inequality. And there, too, we see a clear link that countries that have managed to reduce gender inequality also end up having reduced income inequality. And as you all know, reduced income inequality is critical if we want to have sustainable economic growth. So that correlation is also there. The final quick thing I'll mention is just that IMF staff research has also found an association between greater women's participation in the economy, lower inequality on the gender side, and higher output and export diversification. So again, for many low-income countries in particular, but even for many emerging markets and even advanced economies, diversification issues are very critical issues right now. So this correlation between women's participation and diversity is quite important. And so I will also mention, and this ties a bit with the seminar that was on, with the discussion from the earlier session on the future of work. A second paper we have coming out tomorrow focuses on issues of technology and gender. And there we find that women are disproportionately involved in jobs that are prone to automation. So when you look at the future of work, you look at increasing automation, it turns out that women, perhaps not surprisingly, are involved in more of the sort of routine tasks that are going to be more susceptible to automation. And that paper, again, gets into a lot of the policy recommendations on how we can change policies at the national and local level in countries to try to counterbalance some of that, mainly looking at things like skills upgrades, lifelong learning, some of the things the minister talked about this morning, for example. So there's lots more benefits. I'm happy to talk about this in more detail if you would want to, but including benefits related to the financial sector, more of our research linking increased women's participation with greater financial sector stability, with greater profits in the case of the corporate sector. There's a lot of analytical work in this area, not all done by the IMF, but certainly we've made significant contributions in recent years to that area. The other quick thing I'll say, so that's it in terms of macroeconomic benefits. Just to talk a little bit about what the IMF is doing in the country-specific context. We've recently had a series of pilot analyses. So we had an initial round of over 40 countries were part of these gender pilots that we did, where we went to countries, had intense discussions with the government, in some cases with members of parliament, but also with civil society, with academics. And in those, we focus on countries where gender is a macro-critical issue, where, again, increasing gender participation could be useful in terms of economic growth, economic stability, sustainable growth. So we've done a lot of work in all of these countries. We have published reports on all of them. Some of the numbers I mentioned earlier come from some of those reports. Right now, we're moving away from the pilot approach, and we've now taken an approach where we just have mainstream gender into all of our work at the IMF. So it's no longer selective pilot countries. We're going to be addressing gender issues in all countries where it's macro-critical, where it has this sort of critical effect on macroeconomic outcomes. It's not going to be, doesn't mean that every country is going to have that kind of a discussion, but in those countries where this is a real issue, we'll be having that discussion and trying to give policy advice and working closely with country authorities at all levels to try to move the needle in that area. Separate from our work in this sort of general economic advice, we also have lending programs, as you know, and we've also covered gender issues in a few of our lending programs, including in programs with Egypt, Jordan, and Niger, just for example. And we've also looked at those issues in a number of other lending programs as well. The last quick thing I'll say before I turn over back to Mr. Ketkar is on the issue of gender budgeting. It's a significant issue that we're paying more attention to, and again, working very closely with countries on. There, a lot of our work tends to be in the capacity development area, where we're providing technical assistance and training and working with countries to try to implement gender budgeting reforms of various kinds. We did a big research project in this area in 2016 in partnership with the UK DFID. The IMF completed one of the first ever global reviews of gender responsive budgeting issues. We produced a policy paper on that issue, and we've produced a number of other papers since that time as a result of the research done with that grant from DFID. We also have a number of training courses, as I mentioned. We've also been doing a lot of peer workshops, particularly in Africa and other places, in close coordination with partner institutions like the UN Women, with the World Bank and other partners in this area. Over 80 countries, I focus right now on gender budgeting issues. And again, the numbers we see there for countries that have managed to do this right are quite significant also. Maybe I'll just finally conclude with some of the quick lessons we've learned from this gender budgeting exercise. I know gender budgeting is a big issue for some parliamentarians as well, and in some countries it's a significant focus. So I just wanted to mention this. Some of the common features that seem to make a difference in those countries that have managed to really do gender budgeting right. First of all, legal mandates do matter in terms of countries having a legally mandated gender budgeting regime. Austria, Bolivia, Rwanda have constitutional mandates, actually, but again, a number of countries, including many of yours here, I'm sure have it enshrined in the law. Second lesson is that the Ministry of Finance leadership is very important. This cannot be an issue just with the gender ministries and with ministries traditionally focused on this area. Obviously, it's a big issue for parliamentarians, but Ministry of Finance engagement is key. Another lesson that transparency and accountability can be improved through tools such as gender statements. And so we're seeing a number of countries beginning to issue these gender statements. Australia, Canada, Morocco, and Nepal have all recently issued gender budget statements. And then a final point that monitoring and evaluation is key. Uganda has introduced a new measure in this area to ensure that women's needs are addressed. And again, these are just some of the lessons that we've learned, at least in our work in this area. There's a lot more I could say. A big part of what we focus on is removing legal restrictions to women's participation in the economy, an issue that relates directly to parliamentarians. But I'll stop right here, and I'm happy to answer any further questions. Again, thank you very much.
There's a slight change in sequence of our speakers and question and answer session. Ms. Nurahati, how do you pronounce? Ms. Nurahati was supposed to give a keynote address, but she is coming a little late, right?
Ms. Georgia. Crystal.
She's here? Ah, yeah, sorry. Christiana. Sorry, she was originally. Christiana Georgieva. She had replaced the speaker, earlier keynote speaker, and she will be coming a little late. She has come already? She has come already?
Yes, so she can come.
She can come now? Yeah.
So we're just going to listen to the Chief Executive, Kristalina Georgieva, and then we will have a chance after that to return to questions on the panel that we've just heard from. Thank you.
But you will introduce her. the schedule for you?
I'm so sorry. This sometimes happens. But thank you. Very, very
Yeah.
No, introduce me.
Just to say. Okay.
That I'm the chief executive officer.
Okay, okay.
That's plenty.
What do I say? Kristalina?
Kristalina. My last name is Georgieva, but you can say just Kristalina.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to introduce to you the keynote speaker, who is actually not giving keynote at the time of keynote, but a little later. So she is the Chief Executive Officer of the World Bank. As a CEO of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and International Development Association, the World Bank is a leading arm for middle income and poor countries. Georgieva builds support across the international community to help mobilize resources and develop more effective solutions for the poor at the scale required. Previously, she was Bulgarian national, helped shape the agenda of the European Union since 2010, first as Commissioner for International Cooperation, Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Response, and later as the European Commission Vice President for Budget and, of course, Human Resources. Georgieva is widely respected for her efforts to mobilize the international community to find innovative solutions to today's very complex challenges. As the co-chair of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on humanitarian financing, she secured the adoption of a much more effective system to meet the needs of a record number of vulnerable people. Before working for the European Union, Kristalina held multiple positions at the World Bank from 1993, including Vice President and Corporate Secretary, Director for Sustainable Development, World Bank Director for the Russian Federation, and Director for Environment and Social Development for the East Asia and Pacific region. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and thank you all for giving me an opportunity to be with you and talk about something that throughout my life has been a passion, and it is how to make sure that women contribute to their families, their communities, their countries for the benefit of everybody, men and women. But before I do that, I want to turn to our hosts, those that are here from Indonesia, to say thank you for your hospitality, and also to tell you how heartfelt it was to face together with you the tragedy that just occurred in Sulawesi. We feel for the families of those who lost family members and that are struggling now to recover. We have been for many, many years partners of Indonesia in disaster risk management, and we see that it is our duty to step up, to do more in the moment of need of Indonesia. We are very grateful that we have a chance to have, during the annual meetings, a discussion on what so much matters for all of us to be more resilient in the face of more frequent and more devastating natural disasters. And it is actually investing in people, in people's capabilities to be agile and adaptable to our fast-changing world. The topic I'm invested to talk about is actually a little bit more than half of the world's population, women, that tend to be the pillars in a moment of tragedy to their families and to their societies. And yet, we are still facing a difficulty to make sure that women, girls and women everywhere, have equal access to education, to opportunities. And I want to start with two headline numbers for this audience. One is already in this booklet. What does it mean for the world in terms of loss of wealth not to have gender equality? we came up with a rather staggering figure, $160 trillion of wealth that is lost. We calculated this in a very straightforward manner, as many of you may have heard. This year, we decided to measure the wealth of the world for the first time, taking into account human capital, people. For many years, we would publish a wealth estimate that would be based on physical capital, the buildings, the industries, the cars, the trains, the planes, natural capital, land, fishery, forest, and the institution, including the financial institutions that make the economies function. This year, for the first time, we said, wait a minute, how about people? How much people are part of the wealth of our planet? And to our surprise, we came up with a very impressive number. 2/3 of the wealth of the planet, of the wealth of the world, is us. It is people. And in developing countries, that share tends to be a little smaller. In the rich world, tends to be a little bigger. And the obvious conclusion is, if we want countries to succeed, those that may be falling behind to catch up, it is absolutely critical to invest in people. But then we asked the question that the answer is in this little program. Since we know that gender equality means that inequality means that women do not fully contribute to their societies, how much is the loss? And the loss is that staggering number. So to give you the total wealth, $1,123 trillion. This is the wealth of our world. And it would have been $160 trillion bigger if women were to fully participate. So I'm asking myself, if in my own household I decide to throw 18% of the wealth of my family, how would I feel about it? And I think the answer is very simple. I would feel pretty stupid. So how come that we are in the face of this clear need to benefit for full integration of girls and women still not quite there? And there are reasons for that. And this is the second highlight number I would like to put in your mind. And it is 104. 104 is the number of countries that are not giving full opportunity for women to participate in the workforce legally. And then if we go a bit further, we would find that there are at least another 30 countries where one way or another there is a legal obstacle. Why I'm bringing this to your attention? For a very straightforward reason. You make the laws of your countries, and it is up to you to eliminate any barriers, legal barriers, for the full participation of women in our societies. Now, what have we learned, we as a World Bank, what have we learned about gender equality? Let me start with the obvious. We learned that it actually takes the empathy of men for more doors to be opened to women, and the perseverance of women to knock and walk through these doors. Let me tell you my story. I joined the World Bank in 1993. I was invited first to give a talk at the bank. I was at MIT. So here I come to the World Bank in 1993. I had my best suit, of course, for the World Bank, and it was a brown jacket with flowers. I walked in the bank, looked around, walked out, went and bought a dark blue suit so I can fit. The World Bank in '93 was primarily men and women try to really kind of look and sound like men. No more. We had President Wolfenson. He came to the bank shortly after I joined in 1996. And over 10 years, he made it so very clear that for us to be successful as a development organization, we have to be like the world we serve. We have to represent the world we serve. And as you can see, no more Darciut. We are now, the bank is really a very strongly representative of all the diversity of people from different regions, different cultures, and of course, gender. As I sit here in front of you, I can proudly report that we made a pledge to have gender equality in our senior ranks by 2020. And we met this pledge 2 years before schedule. We now have gender parity in the senior ranks of the World Bank, vice presidents and above. And our president, Jim Kim, has been relentlessly championing what is now known as he for she. And then he brought me back at the bank from the European Commission to champion she for she. We make a great pair. Let me, on a very serious note, touch upon the 4 things I learned in my professional life make a difference. The first is so very obvious. Girls in school. We have to make sure that our girls have a chance to study equal to boys, that they are in school and they stay there. They don't marry early. They graduate, and they graduate with skills that are the same skills in math, skills in all the fields of knowledge that are out there. We did a study at the bank of the cost of early marriage, of girls quitting school to get married early, and it is in the billions of loss. And not only because we lose the contribution they could make to labor force, but also because very often early marriage leads to children being born prematurely or without the capacity of the mother to look after them, with all the complications for their own well-being. And when girls are in school and stay and graduate, what we find is that a vibrant economy gets even more vibrant. But today we have only 1 in 3 girls that complete lower secondary school, and we have, unfortunately, the loss of value from that impeding over many, many, many decades. It is possible, even in the most difficult of circumstances, to turn this around. I don't know whether there is anybody from Afghanistan in the audience, but here is a story. When we re-engaged with Afghanistan 15 years ago, only 1 million children, Afghan children, would go to school. Over 90% boys, very few girls. Today we have 8 million Afghan children in school, 8 times more, and nearly 40% are girls. Not yet parity, but a very, very, very significant progress over short 15 years. And my respect goes to the girls and their families, because in some cases they take risk to their lives to go to school, but they do. Given this opportunity, they do. Secondly, what we have learned is that we have to make, all of us, we have to know and make the economic case for gender equality. We need to know the numbers. What does it mean, for example, in Middle East and North Africa, or in South Asia? What does it mean to achieve gender equality? What would be the value of it? How do we get there? And we as an institution have been quite keen to be serving you with these numbers, including through a very interesting report called Women, Business and the Law. Since you're lawmakers, I strongly recommend it. It tells us who does well and who doesn't. For example, we know that in 59 countries, there are no laws to protect women against sexual harassment in the workplace. In 18 countries, husbands can legally prohibit women from working. And giving the stories is actually very helpful to you. The third lesson we learned is safety of women makes a huge difference. I was in Mumbai, in India. We have a project that supports rail services, and upon the request of actually our partners in Mumbai, we have women-only cars on the city rail. I traveled in one of these women-only cars in a second-class compartment, talked with the women, and they tell me, if we don't have that, we probably won't go to school, we probably won't go to work because we would be harassed. So thinking of safety and security of women actually makes a huge difference for them. And last but not least, if we want women to work, we have to make sure that there is child care. Women are going to be much more at ease if there are kindergartens and schools where their kids can go, and if their work life balance is arranged in a way that allows them to work. And by the way, we learned that men want exactly the same thing. When I was Vice President for Budget and Human Resources in the European Commission, we did the survey of the interest in childcare. And I thought it would be mostly the women that would respond. I was very wrong. Many of the men said, yes, we want it, because when you have flexible working arrangement, when you have childcare, I'm sorry, then families can balance life, work, and especially for women, that makes a huge, huge difference. So let me stop here with the following. We have seen an enormous change in our lifetimes on so many counts. Things that seemed impossible were impossible until they were done. And the same, I very strongly believe applies to gender equality. For many of us, it seemed like this is a good objective, but it would never, ever quite really 100% happen. And yet we have some countries on this planet, and I'm thinking of the Nordic countries, that have actually gone that far. And guess what? Countries when there is gender equality, there is also happiness. They rank very highly on the global happiness index. So if we want to live in wealthy, productive, and happy places, let's get it done. Thank you very much.
Very much, Georgieva. It was a very brilliant and off-the-cuff speech. I just want to add 2 points. That unfortunately there has been a political equilibrium between men and women in many parts of the country, including South Asia, where otherwise there is a huge economic and social discrimination. Like we had a Prime Minister Indira Gandhi for 17 years, and in most backward states of India, we have had the chief ministers women. In Bihar, in Uttar Pradesh, and also in places like Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, they are of course quite progressive states, but there are women chief ministers. So on the one hand, and many participants in the political movements, various parts of movement, right from freedom movement onwards, Mahatma Gandhi was the person who introduced women in freedom movement. So on the one hand, we have political equilibrium emerging, but social and economic equilibrium not emerging. So I think, therefore, this particular topic for this discussion should focus even on that. But before making my speech further, I want to throw open the floor and you ask the questions, to respective panelists and they will respond.
Malaysia. Can I? Yes, thank you. It's a very interesting discussion, I used to be the chairman of Malaysian External Trade under the previous government in Malaysia, and I would like to ask Ms. Nursanti about the Indonesia's experience in promoting digital initiative to encourage the women to participate online and to have owned enterprises in Indonesia. And another question that I would like to ask is, we know, like for example in Malaysia and even in Bangladesh, there's a lot of assistance being given to micro business owners. But when I was the chairperson of Malaysian External Trade, we in Madrid, in short, it is called Madrid, we realized there are some obstacles for the ladies, for the women business owners to go beyond the micro businesses owners, because if they want to go to mid-tier companies, to be part of the mid-tier company, or even want to go globally, they will have challenges in terms of funding. I'm just wondering if you can share with us here on how Indonesia is tackling these challenges, if you have any. I mean, there are a lot of assistance at the micro business side, but not at the mid-tier and the global, and for them to go global, if you can share with them, because I envy on how Indonesia is helping out the women, especially in entrepreneurship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As I have mentioned earlier, actually, when we talk about the digital economy, the technology, digital technology, giving more advantages to the woman. And in Indonesia, more of the online business, you know, like production of the clothes and everything, SMEs, what I have mentioned earlier, is mostly owned by women. And there is such a law and regulation actually have given by the governments to help the women more actively participate in the economy, especially on the small and medium enterprises. And actually, it's not only encouraging more to participate in the economy, global economy, but also we, the governments, also have a laws in protecting them. As it was mentioned earlier by CEO of the World Bank, actually women's crimes against women. So we do have such of laws has already been issued in Indonesia, but when we are talking about the equality, the gender equality, there is a law already. It started from the Constitution in 1945. The opportunity is there, but honestly, in the implementation itself, is not really implemented 100%. I was asking her just now in the IMF research, is there any country have an equal gender between woman and man? And she said no. So it's answering my wondering why in Indonesia itself, in the parliament, there is no speaker in our parliament is a woman. It's all men. The head of the commission is still men. So honestly, that's what happened. So we need to work more in the parliament itself, to pushing the governments as well as to make the regulation is more giving the opportunities to a woman. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to refer to what Madame Georgieva said in her presentation. She showed us a very clear diagnostic of the situation of women in developing countries. In my country, Morocco, just 25.3% of women are considered to be active in the workforce, and it's difficult for them to be autonomous because of the mindset and because of education and also because of many socio-cultural barriers. Many girls do not go to school, and also girls do not have the opportunity to occupy certain jobs that are reserved for men. And they also come up against other kinds of barriers with regard to higher education, their access to higher education. $160 trillion are lost because of inegalities between men and women. And when women have the courage and the possibilities of seeking other jobs, she still has problems getting funding. The World Bank is taking into account specific mechanisms that include socio-cultural elements to support women and help them to reconsider their positions or situations, and also to introduce such things as quotas so that you have positive discrimination on behalf of women to overcome some of the obstacles faced in Morocco and similar countries.
Merci pour votre question. To English, to say that we are particularly keen to equip countries where the disparities are so significant. And in the Middle East and the North Africa region, we have done some additional studies that show that one of the most serious problems is indeed women getting education, but not using it in the labor force. And the percentages you gave for Morocco is pretty much the percentage in Tunisia. Well, it's a little higher in Egypt, but it is quite massive. So the argument we have made to many of the heads of states in the region is very simple. To have stability in the society, it is very important to build a strong and resilient middle class. But to build middle class, it is so very important to have dual income families, both men and women working. If the region is to try to build middle class to get that income level only with men working, men have to be 1.6 times more productive than men in the developed world, which is not very likely to happen anytime soon. So it is simply the rational objective of stable and secure society that gives the argument for women, especially when they already have the education, to be able to use it. And we actually found that in some countries, we are at the point when more women graduate from university, but only half of those who graduate step into using their degrees. So our determination is to work with countries on that rationale. You want stability and security, you want societies to prosper, please make sure that we eliminate obstacles. And the good news is that since we have engaged very much on this issue of low and inclusion, progress towards gender equality. In the Middle East and North Africa, basically 1/3 of the countries have made reforms in that direction just this last year. And I would be, if you are interested, we can send you more information specifically on Morocco, what has been done there. You made a very, very important point on the role of quotas. This is a hotly debated issue, and very often the debate is, oh, you know, quotas, this is artificial, we shouldn't do it. But if we don't do it, if we don't have quotas to push gender equality, it would take us maybe in a natural way, it would take us maybe 100, 150 years to get there. So we concluded at the bank that quotas are important. We ourselves gave this target gender parity in senior management, and it helps. When you are determined, then you pursue this, and then it changes. Even when you have quotas, like Indonesia has target. If I remember correctly, 1/3 of the people on the list for parliament have to be women, but only 20% are women in the parliament. Even when you have it, it is difficult. So I wholeheartedly believe that we have to use some positive discrimination until we get at least in the vicinity of equality. And I see that MP Ketkar nodded, so good. There seems to be, I don't see anybody saying no, no, no in this room, so you seem to be on the right track.
Well, unfortunately, not much time is left. I can take, I think, Mr. Jeremy will take over the question answer. Mr. Jeremy, there's some change?
No, it's okay.
Mr. Jeremy will take over? Yeah. The suggestion is that you take over the next session of question answers. 4 minutes. 15 more minutes. Okay, time has been expended rather than the printed time. Printed time was at 4 o'clock. So 15 more minutes and we'll take the questions. Yes? And after this, you.
Thank you. I just have one question for the Madam CEO, Ms. Georgieva. Specifically on the, it says here that the, let me just quote the sentence here. The IMF research shows that closing gender gaps will result in greater stability, blah, blah, blah. In short, that there is a research done by IMF that's resulting in a greater stability and a positive fiscal and budgetary impact on client countries, IMF client countries. The raising female labor force participation rates to male levels could boost GDP by 5% in the US, 9% in Japan, and 27% in India. My question is, what was the specific driver derived from that research that as a result you came out with those numbers? Thank you.
We what we do is we look at the impact of female participation in the labor force as a boost to the economy, and at least I can tell you at the World Bank, the methodology we apply is for example, to capture human capital, or sorry, the role of people in the wealth of nations and the role of inequality. The methodology we apply is net present value of future earnings. So we say, what is the my net present value of my future earning? We calculate it for the economies as a whole, and then we ask a question: if women were to participate fully in the economy, and if they were paid their value, what would that mean? This is our methodology, and this is how we come with the $160 trillion foregone because of inequality. My understanding is that the IMF work, and I'm sorry I haven't gone into the deep methodology of their research, but my understanding is that they're looking exactly at that. How, if you increase participation and you improve the equality of pay, how would that boost GDP? Why is that important? Because, of course, if women are paid equal to men, they have more purchasing power, there is more consumption in the country, the economy operates on a higher, at a higher rate. But we will have to come back to you with more details on specifically how the IMF did it. But if I can make a broader point, maybe somebody here can. I'm from the IMF. Oh, here is the IMF. She's, of course. Why don't you just answer the specificity on the methodology here? But I just want to make a broader point for the IMF. Bravo to the IMF, because getting into productivity and potential for growth, including gender equality, was not something that IMF used to do some years ago. So bravo.
I think Kristalina already sort of described the basic methodology. We focus on both female labor force participation, but also wage gaps as well. So depending, the numbers I had given earlier, because I had given some of our recent country-specific numbers, are either wage gaps or labor force gaps or both. The one thing I wanted to mention, and again, we can go into specifics if you wanted any of it. I had mentioned some specific country numbers earlier. The one point I wanted to make, and again, first off, hats off to the World Bank. A lot of the data that we use comes from the bank. We work very closely with bank colleagues in this area. And the database on legal restrictions in particular, the bank has a database that we rely on quite heavily for a lot of our analysis. One point I wanted to just make, and I mentioned this earlier, but all of these calculations, both we and the bank and others out there are doing on various aspects. This paper I mentioned we're coming out with tomorrow is going to add just a further level of analysis, because that paper shows that many of our estimates so far have assumed that women and men were equal substitutes. So if you substituted, brought women into the workforce, it would be similar to bringing men. And this research coming out tomorrow shows that you actually get bigger bang from the buck, so to speak, by having women enter the workforce, because women bring sort of diversity benefits in terms of how they think, how they approach problems. So it's more than just if a man was doing the same job. The fact that women are already underrepresented, adding that level of diversity sort of brings its own benefits. And it positively benefits both men and women. Anyway, that paper is coming out tomorrow. I had mentioned it earlier, but that would be one of the findings.
Given the time constraint, I'll take 3 questions, one after another, instead of answering each question independently, and then simultaneously all 3 questions will be answered. So 1, 2, and 3. One
okay.
here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask World Bank and IMF. It's true we have laws which talks about women in politics, a third. In employment, you need to have very many. But the percentage you are talking about is about 5% or less of the women, because the majority of the women are not in politics, are not in this formal employment. They are in the villages, digging and whatever. And there's no law catering for such. And they are very hardworking. They are the majority hardworking. They are even involved in business. But when they go to a bank, for example, they will say, where is the collateral? And yet, if you give a woman money, she will pay back more than a man. Men tend to take risks, but women fear risks. Again, World Bank and IMF has talked about the disabled. There's something criteria. Some countries give a tax exemption for those employing the disabled. Now, I want to find out, women need capital to do business. What is World Bank and IMF doing to help women? Is there a way that surely should come up to help women so that they access capital without collateral. And secondly, banks make a lot of money, too much. Is there a way IMF and World Bank can team up with banks and say, these local banks or international banks, and say, of all the profits you have made, maybe 5% of that profit should be lent to women, or 10% at zero interest, because it is possible if you partner up with the banks and the government. So I want to find out what World Bank is doing to help the 95 plus who are not covered by politics and formal employment.
Thank you. I really enjoyed all of your presentations. I was looking at the Women, Business and the Law report, and specifically looking at my country. Kosovo, apparently, we're doing pretty good. In the report, we're scoring 100% in most of the categories. But unfortunately, the reality couldn't be any similar to that. Let me just take 3 examples. One, incentives in the workplace. In fact, Kosovo has one of the highest inactivity rates among women in the labor force. It's at about 80%, which in itself speaks that there are not enough incentives in the workplace, despite of legislation that might look really nice. When we're talking about reality in the ground, there's non-implementation. Second, discrimination in courts. And that relates also to property. Although we've scored 100% when it comes to property in this paper, in fact, only 6% of the women in Kosovo inherit anything. Only 6%. Despite of the fact that the law says that sons and daughters, husbands and wives have equal rights in inheriting property. So my question basically is, are you planning to go to the next step? So going beyond legislation, surveying the actual truth and the reality in the ground, and then taking it from there and seeing how can both the World Bank and the IMF help these client countries in developing policies and also implementing those policies that would help either fight the inactivity rate among women or fight the discrimination that exists in the workplace, in the courts, as well as in implementing legislation that relates to property, which is so essential for the economic empowerment of women. Thank you.
Just very quickly, the figures you give of an improvement in GDP if women are to participate effectively in the economy are staggering, actually, astonishing. And one can only say it's idiotic that this is the situation. It's utterly obscene, actually. One had an idea that if women participated more effectively, GDP would grow more than it has. But the figures here are really, well, as I said, staggering. Obviously, getting women to participate in the economy more effectively is related to broader issues. Structural, historical, cultural, religion is used. It's used by men mainly to rationalize the inferiorization of women. All of these things have to be addressed. But when you say we are MPs, we should pass laws, take my own country, South Africa. We have an Equality Commission. We have the Gender Commission. We have the Human Rights Commission. We have labor laws that don't allow you to discriminate. We have affirmative action. And we have a whole plethora of other policies and rules. In fact, in the ANC, it's required of us that 50% of our candidates to parliament have to be women. Other parties don't have that, but overall it still remains true that the number of women public representatives in our country is very high compared to other countries. In the government, our cabinet hovers between 44 and 48% women. So women are in very powerful positions. Our speakers for the last, I think 15 years, our speakers and deputy speakers have been women. So still, you know, in practice, women are not being paid the same wages as men are. So what I'm saying is that this is a long haul. And it's not enough that we pass laws. We need to work with civil society, the trade union movement, and so on. And finally, I think in some senses, it's not just gender, it's also ethnicity and race. So in other words, when we call for women to get the same wages, it's also true that people who come from a particular religious background in some countries or an ethnic background in some countries, they don't get what women of other ethnic groups and other religions might. And finally, now that we're in the world of artificial intelligence and robots, hopefully the robots that are going to take over many of the jobs will be female, have female voices, and wreak revenge on us as men.
Okay. What a wonderful engagement from those participating here. Very good questions and very good points made. Let me start with financial inclusion of women. The point that the MP from Uganda made. When we discuss at the World Bank the ability to bring more dynamism in economies, there are many factors, and gender equality is one, and then gender equality has many dimensions, and I'll come back to the point from Kosovo. But one of the key dimensions of inequality is lack of property rights, access to land, and of course access to finance. So we have been working quite intensively on addressing this issue of inability to access finance. And of course, we now have all the data to show that women are very reliable. When they borrow, 98% they pay back. So what we do in that regard is a combination of measures that includes property rights, very important, what are the laws in the country and how much these laws are respected, but also how we can create in the world of new technology and digital connectivity capacity for women to easily access microfinance and a larger financing. We have a number of initiatives at the bank. One is called Wi-Fi, Women Entrepreneur Initiative, that took the support of some donors to create a fund specifically targeting women entrepreneurs with the objective of getting at least $1 billion in the hands of women. We have many programs where there are specifically measures for financial inclusion for lending to women entrepreneurs. And I'll tell you a story. It is not from Uganda, it's from Ethiopia. I was visiting one of our programs for women entrepreneurs. And so I'm meeting this group of women and asking them a question, how their business goes. And then after the first one made the presentation, she said to me, no, after she finished, I turned to her and I said, do you have any messages for me, for the bank? She said, yes, I have a business plans, and I need another $10,000, and then I can scale up massively. So comes the second woman entrepreneur. She talks, she finished, and I didn't ask the question, what would you need? And kind of she turns to the interpreter, whispers in his ear. He looks at me and says, you didn't ask her the question. And of course the question is, what more can you do, and what would you need? And the amounts we are talking about are relatively small, but the creativity, the determination was so impactful. So I went back to my colleagues and I said, I want to see in any program from now on that is about women entrepreneurs, for you to have phase 1, and then upon success, phase 2, and upon success, phase 3, so we can actually scale up massively. So a lot to be done. We do believe that the 3 legs, think about women entrepreneurs, the 3 legs are property rights, identity, digital and legal identity, and of course access to finance, especially digital financial inclusion. Turn the funds of women into banks. A lot that we can do more in that regard. And actually, let me go to the point from Kosovo on women, business, and the law. You're absolutely right. This is a report that is about laws on the books. It is not a report about how the laws on the books are implemented. And we are working in many countries with partners on how the laws on the books are implemented. Obviously, I am fully aware that in Kosovo, frankly, not only in Kosovo, we are from the same neighborhood, in the whole neighborhood, there is a bit of disconnect between laws on the books and how they're implemented. So we have to work. And the MP from South Africa said it so well. It is a long haul. We have to just persevere, move forward. And we also need to recognize that discrimination is not only on the basis of gender. You're absolutely right about that. Why we are taking the issue of gender discrimination as one very big block? Because here is something one, because women are more than half of the people on this planet, right? But also because what we have to recognize is that women, by and large, tend to be less aggressive in pursuing their rights. It's just a matter of fact. Take me, every single time I would be offered to step up professionally, I would go home and I would say to my family, oh, I don't know, am I the right person? And actually, I had recently a case, again, life teaches us good lessons. I was interviewing a man and a woman. They both had half of the requirements for the job entirely, and for the other half kind of almost there, but not quite. And so I'm going through the interview, and here is what happened. The woman says, well, I don't know, I only meet half of the requirement, right? The man says, I meet entire half of the requirements so really brilliantly well, and in addition, I'm offering you my fabulous personality. I'm the best person for the job. It's so in a way, we need that on gender equality. We need to recognize that it is not going to come just by waiting for women to, hit the table and ask for their rights. We need to have that kind of discussion and pushing it forward. And as for the robots, the female robots that you projected, here is actually a fun fact on that. In the Middle East, we now have, as a result of automation, women that are operating equipment at the ports that is basically loading and unloading equipment. So work that used to be done only by strong men is now being done by women behind computers that are moving the containers back and forth. So hey, automation may be gender neutral, yes.
Yeah, just quick.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think Kristalina's covered the waterfront on all of these issues, but just to add, the point on mobile money and just on the financial inclusion is so critical. I mean, just mobile digital services. The numbers are astounding in terms of some of the gaps that we've seen in some of our studies, like over 70% of small businesses owned by women are underserved globally. And one could go through all these numbers. What we're finding makes a big difference is the easier access. Fintech is sort of a word that we hear and people get nervous because it's a bit crazy, but it's also been, in some countries, quite instrumental in terms of reducing, to some extent, and in some cases a large extent, that gap. I wanted to say also quickly on the issues of implementation. Yes, it's a long haul, but we're, I think, sort of optimistic that if we continue the efforts, right now the conversation is going on around these issues. As Kristalina said, my own institution, this is not something we talked about. Ministers of finance barely ever talked about gender. Gender used to be the human rights issue. It used to be left to the gender ministry. It used to be this thing that was very far removed. Right now, I think the economic case is being made. People are finally getting it. They don't immediately necessarily take the action, but you can already see the needle is beginning to move. So at least I'm a bit more optimistic in terms of the fact that that conversation on the economics is happening now more than ever before. On the issue, someone mentioned the point about this being sort of cultural in terms of some of the barriers, and that is totally true. But I just want to emphasize that it's hard to overstate how much of a difference even small things can make. So the cultural, those things will take much longer time to change, but our experience in a lot of countries, basic things like making childcare available, making parental leave available, getting rid of discriminatory tax policies that in many advanced economies just discourage women from participating. In other countries, things like sanitation, suddenly the numbers we're looking at data for countries like India and others, we're just improving sanitation, including transportation, Kristalina mentioned, but you can see huge increases in the line on women's participation, on literacy, because suddenly girls can go to school. So I'm just saying we won't change the culture, but there's a lot of very practical things that can be done to make a difference. Final point on the robots as women. As I mentioned earlier, the studies we were doing, including one of the ones being released tomorrow, shows that women's jobs are actually at greatest risk of automation. We tend to disproportionately, in most countries, advanced economies, EMDEs, we do disproportionately the work that robots are taking over. And in a decade to 2 decades, that's going to be a big issue. So there's a lot of things even today that policymakers can begin doing. Again, it's about skills upgrading, it's about lifelong learning, it's about getting women out of those kinds of jobs and into more of the sort of jobs that will be able to compete with the robots, men or women of the future.
Well, actually, I close this session and with just one small remark of Mahatma Gandhi, whose 150th birth anniversary we are celebrating in India. He said, unless all men become, I'm re-paraphrasing, unless all men become feminists, the gender discrimination will not go. Yes. So it is a responsibility of the men, mainly. Thank you.
So, thank you very much indeed, Kristalina, and thank you to the panelists very much for a fascinating session. As you can see, we're running a little bit behind, so what I would suggest is if colleagues can grab some coffee, and then we come back as soon as possible to start the next session. Thank you very much indeed.